Welcome! You're listening to Making Relationships Work. We're a company focused on women and their marriage. We lead and teach women just like you how to grow into and access, whenever you need to, your wise woman's self. The part of you who is deeply connected to your purpose, your innate wisdom, and your husband and family. We teach women in marriages how to rebuild trust and connection, to work through conflicts no matter how deep, no matter how painful, and to lead your marriage to a place where the two of you experience marriage mastery. This podcast is about learning the systems and techniques that truly work to reconnect you back into your marriage so that you can experience the freedom that comes with a masterful marriage. Since this podcast is totally free, if you're getting tons of value and you want to support us and make sure that you get more of this good stuff, subscribe below and rate and review our podcast today. Now, on to the show. Hello, everybody. Hello, wise women. Hello, women making marriages work. We are here today to talk all things anxiety and loneliness in a marriage. And let me tell you, these two experiences of life, these two feelings of life are present in 85% of the women and the couples that I work with. And they're really important topics to talk about. And they're really important topics because what they are is the lever or the understanding of which you can experience how sad you are through these things. So loneliness is this, let's define what these terms mean. So loneliness is this sense of isolation, distance, on my own, without anybody. I always get an image of a small girl or person, if we're talking about your husband, a small girl in a big room. And it's this sense that she's small and she's in a big room. And when you paint that picture, you can have this understanding that for her, if someone was near her, she wouldn't feel so sad anymore and she wouldn't find the room so big anymore. And so loneliness is a distance and a separation of connection. And we're going to talk about loneliness in more detail in a minute. Now, when we're talking about anxiety, my definition of anxiety, and there are lots out there in the world, but for today's video purpose, my definition of anxiety is that sense in your body, that physical manifestation of anxiety is the palpitating heart, the kind of hollowness, the fear, and the increased stress hormones, those increased feelings of everything is not okay. Now, anxiety, and my definition of it, is a fear of the future. And so anxiety is all about what's coming in the future and it's not okay and I'm not okay and it's not safe and I'm not safe. And so when you pair anxiety, feelings of anxiety and feelings of loneliness together in a human, you get this very small person in a room, that analogy I just used, who's afraid of what is going to happen to her. And when we look at that as an individual, outside of your connection to your husband or your connection to your family of origin or your connection to your children or your connection to your community or your connection to your work, then what we're talking about is this lack of safety internally. That's a really powerful statement. So I'm going to pause there for a minute. Anxiety is an internal lack of safety that we have used to make a decision about the world being unsafe, or the future being unsafe, or our work being unsafe, or our marriage being unsafe. And so loneliness and anxiety are on that downward spiral that we talk about. They're not emotions and feelings and physiological experiences that allow us to feel powerful, like we are a vibrant community leader, that we are walking through the world on purpose, and we are uplifting and up-leveling and growing each and every day. and walking with our family in a leadership position, and walking in our community, in our marriage, in our parenting, in our own life as the leader that we are. And so the difference then between somebody experiencing anxiety and loneliness and somebody who is not, who is in that soul connection, purpose, walking their path that is utterly aligned to who that person is quite a big gap. One is kind of in that downward spiral and one is in that upward spiral. And so what we want you to understand is that your marriage, when you're experiencing it through a lens of loneliness, when you're experiencing it through a lens of anxiety, both of those things are things that allow you to feel small and weakened and disconnected and far away. And what we know about marriages where one person or both people feel disconnected or lonely or far away or outside of that sense of belonging in the marriage, we start to have higher rates of mental illness, things like anxiety and depression, and then, kind of the other families that live in the mental health space. But what we mainly have is this sense that the marriage is broken. But you see, my loves, it's not about the marriage being broken. The marriage is a co-created entity where the two of you belong. And each of you have contributed, okay? And so the experience in the marriage is a culture of the family. And the family is the two of you in this instance, not necessarily your children. And what we want to talk about this is that you've made the mistake of thinking it's your marriage that has the problem, or perhaps you blame your partner, your husband, for the problem. And this is a really key discussion point for us today, because your anxiety and your loneliness belong to you. They're not your husband's responsibility. Just like if I was talking about your husband, your beautiful husband, who's as wonderful as you are, if your husband is experiencing loneliness, if your husband is experiencing anxiety, I wouldn't say to him that the fault of that is yours. Does that make sense? Because that's his experience of life. And what we often do with our beautiful partners is we say, if you didn't exist, I wouldn't know that, I wouldn't have such a mirror, and I wouldn't know that I'm in so much pain, because I could do a lot of behaviors that would self-soothe me. But instead, you're standing beside me, and I can see that I am lonely, and I'm going to make that your fault. And that, my friends, is a grave mistake. It's an inaccurate connection point. It's not true. It's not your husband's fault. If we were to look at loneliness and we were to look at anxiety and we were able to work together, let's say you and me are working together, and I was able to reconnect you back into yourself, it wouldn't be me that actually did it. So it makes me sound like a surgeon. I'm not a surgeon. If I was able to show you and teach you how to connect back in with yourself, my love, you wouldn't need somebody else to do that. If I was able to help you reconnect with your purpose and your internal power, you wouldn't be afraid of the future, my loves. Do you know why? Because no matter what came towards you, you would know that you would figure it out. And if you didn't know how to figure it out, you would know where to go to get someone to help, because that's the kind of resourceful woman that you are. And so then the anxiety drops. Then the loneliness drops. And then, how does your marriage look different? When you take that lens, pretend anxiety and loneliness are two lenses of a pair of glasses. If you remove those lenses and you look at your marriage, don't you think it looks different? You might still have years worth of stuff to process. You might still have pain that needs to be worked through. And so what needs to happen then is the marriage needs to be worked on, but not through the lens of anxiety and the lens of loneliness. That, my loves, is a false promise of happiness. Your job is your experience of life. Your job is your experience of being lonely, being connected, being anxious, or being not anxious. That's your job. That's not his job. It's not the marriage's job. It's your job. Now, within all of this discussion today, it's really important that I call out to you that this sits within a healthy framework of a relationship that's not abusive. Okay? Because if you're in a relationship that is abusive, then this frame doesn't apply. In fact, what you need to do is to get yourself to safety and to work with someone in your local community that can do that. This isn't this conversation. This conversation is for those of you who are in a marriage which is hurting and you're blaming your husband for feeling alone and feeling anxious. When you're externalizing your internal experience and saying it lies with him to fix. It doesn't, my loves. It totally doesn't. And the greatest opportunity you have here is for you to find and experience your own power. Your own wonderful, glorious, not too big power, where you take up the space that is yours to take up in the world just because you're a human, where you can walk through the world in alignment with life's purpose for you, God's purpose for you. This is what we're talking about here. And when you're doing that, my loves, the anxiety disappears, the loneliness is gone. And all of a sudden, you're looking at your life through a different set of glasses. I want you to know what those glasses are. And what that means is that it's time for you to do the work. Your own work. There's work to be done with you. There's work to be done in your marriage. And there's work for your husband to do. But this conversation is not about that. This conversation is about you today. So I'm going to have a quick look and see if there are any questions. And then we're going to keep talking. There's lots of people saying hello, which is really nice. Hello, everybody. It's so lovely to have you here. And so we want to talk about the crippling effects that being anxious gives you in your life and being lonely, and how those lenses color the way in which you see the world. So you might not realize it, but when you have your glasses on and their anxiety or their loneliness, those lenses that you look through, what happens is you start to find even more ways to feel alone and isolated. You start to look for the ways you're not included instead of the ways you are. You begin to notice and weight, as in add a weight, to the bias that you have that you don't belong, that you're not worth very much, that you're not very valuable, that you're not important, that you are somebody who can be put second or third. And what that tells me is that you're not actually prioritizing yourself as the number one person that needs to be looked after. And then we've all heard this idea that you fit your own life mask first. It's been bandied about, it's been butchered a bit actually. But essentially, when you prioritize yourself and you love yourself enough to do that, you are showing the world how to treat you. And that doesn't mean that you prioritize yourself at the expense of others in a negative way. But it does mean that you know what you need, and you do, and you give yourself that. You do what you need to do for that in a way that allows you to stay calm, connected, and kind with those around you. And the women that I work with and the women that I know that suffer from anxiety and loneliness, they know that their loneliness is projected into their marriage, that their anxiety projects fear into their marriage or problems into their marriage. They know that. And what they are doing is they're working to undo that impact that those pain points that live in them have. Because when you can heal those pain points that live inside of you, you would be just, I was going to say amazed. It doesn't feel like the most powerful of words. You would be stupefied, Harry Potter reference. You would be delighted by what your marriage and what your hope levels feel like about your marriage when you have that sense that you can feel good in here and look at your marriage without that lens of being alone and lonely and small, and that lens of being anxious and afraid of the future and feeling as though you need to control instead of, I can never get those alarms to turn off, can I? So anxiety, what we do with it, just to build on my last stream of consciousness thought, what we do with anxiety is we feel fearful, and so we look for ways that allow us to feel as though we're in control. So we start to control the way the house looks, the way the husband looks, the way your children look, the way things run, the processes we use, the decisions we make, the products we have in the home, the way that we eat, the way that we make holiday plans. We start to control those variables. And in that illusion of control, we find some solace for our fear of the future, our fear of uncertainty, our fear of the unknown. And that external manifestation is something that is hard for our children. It is hard for our husbands to experience and to figure out where we are and to try and adapt our behavior so that you feel safe. So I want you to know that it's not their job to do that. It's not their job to make you feel safe in this world. And it's your job. It's also not your job to make your husband feel safe in the world, or to go above and beyond in that way of parenting to appease anxiety in a child. Although that, my loves, is a whole other conversation, so I'm going to leave that one there. That's not for today. We'll talk about adults, not dependents. And so I want you to realize that the behaviors that you do that help you keep your anxiety low are contributing to your marriage in ways that if your anxiety was under control, your marriage wouldn't suffer for. And so I want you to think about what the difference would be in your marriage if you didn't have your anxiety and your loneliness, those behaviors associated with those feelings, infiltrating. What would your marriage look like? What would it feel like? Chances are you'd feel like there's a spike in hope, a spike in optimism, a spike in well-being, a spike in belonging, a spike in peace, a spike in harmony and gratitude, and you would really feel that sense of connection. And then the next thought you would have is, but there's so much other problems. We've got so many other problems here. And so both can be true, yeah? So there's three things, right? There's you, there's your husband, then there's the marriage you share. So what we're talking about today is your experience of loneliness, your experience of anxiety, and then we're talking about how that applies in your marriage and how that colors your marriage and what that feels like for your husband. Yeah? And so if you're not the one that has anxiety or loneliness and your husband does, then you inverse that. And what I want you to know is that the experience of loneliness, the experience of anxiety, are things that can be balanced, that can be healed, that can allow you to come into kind of this neutral, balanced state that we call your wise woman. And from here, when you interact in your marriage, everything is different. Do you still have some stuff to work through from those years where your anxiety and your loneliness, those colorings have done some damage? Yes. Can we deal with them? Absolutely. Yeah. So do you see that when we look at you and then we look at your marriage, we can see what you've contributed and we can see how your marriage, that co-created entity, has responded. And then from there, we can start to make changes in you so that your marriage then feels different. And then we start to process the pain that lives in your marriage. And then all of a sudden, you go from a marriage that wasn't working, which was kind of riddled with doubt and loneliness, perhaps some shame and some disconnect, loneliness, upset, hurt, betrayal. We go from that into something that is fixable, that is kind, that is hopeful, that is welcoming, that is connected, that is loving, that is uplifting, that is belonging, that is hopeful, that is optimistic. And you see, just by getting started in that space of loneliness and anxiety and working through how to bring yourself some stillness, some kindness, some self-compassion, some bringing you back on purpose, that the rest of the journey starts to unfold and to rise up to where you are. Can you see that? Can you see how important you are? Can you see what your leadership can do? Can you see what your healing can do? All of this I want for you, my loves. I want you to know what it's like to interact with life and to be able to notice if you're moving into an anxious moment, to be able to notice if you've been triggered into feeling lonely, and then to know exactly what to do to bring yourself back to neutral so that you don't color the rest of your day, the rest of your relationships with those lenses that aren't an accurate reflection of who you are. I want you to know what that is so that you can have some relief from yourself. And so, my loves, if you have any questions, I want you to leave them in the comments. I want to encourage you to figure out what lenses are coloring your marriage, and then what is your next right step to do about it. As always, I'm here to help. And so we're going to leave my breakthrough call booking link in the comments for you to book a call with me if you want some help on this. If you're ready for that transformation, I want to hear from you. And if you're looking for ways to grow, feel free to start a thread in these comments and we can all join in. What I want for you is freedom. Freedom from those experiences in your body that are hurting you and that are kind of manifesting out into all of your relationships, particularly your marriage, perhaps also your parenting. I want you to have some freedom from that. And I want you to think about what would happen if that coloring of those lenses changed, if it went to clear. So if we imagine those lenses of anxiety and loneliness as being red, yeah, they're red. What would happen if you stopped looking through a red lens and started seeing through a clear lens, which was just you in your most beautiful, connected, powerful, wise woman state? What would happen for you? How would that change your life? This is the conversation to have, isn't it? This is the one that allows you to do and create anything that you want, including a wonderful marriage. All right, my loves, it's time for me to go. I wish you a wonderful week. It's so nice to share this time with you every week. I love it. Later in the week, we're going to be talking with a pre-recorded interview that I've done with our beautiful wise woman, Amy, who's going to tell you all about how she was moving out and looking to move across country because her marriage was imploding. And both of them were looking for real estate listings and where they are now. And there's a beautiful end story to this because it ends with a second ring. It's wonderful. And we've got pictures. So you're going to want to tune in for that on Thursday night, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Until then, my loves, I will say have a great week. I miss you already. You're wonderful. Don't forget how wonderful you are and how everything you want is right there once you make the decision to claim the life that belongs to you, to take up the space of yours, to heal the anxiety, to heal the feelings of aloneness and loneliness. I want that for you. You're here in our group. You belong here. We love you. And I'll see you later. Bye, darlings.